I arrived at the schoolhouse before dawn that Christmas morning, my breath forming clouds in the December cold. The frost had painted elaborate patterns across the window panes, delicate ferns and flowers that would melt. By noon, I traced one with my finger, thinking how beautiful the frontier could be when you didn't look too closely at the hardship beneath. Inside, I lit the stove and set about decorating pine branches I'd cut the day before. A few paper chains the older students had made. Nothing extravagant, but enough to make the one-room schoolhouse feel festive. I'd been teaching here for 3 months, and this was my first frontier Christmas. Everything still felt like an adventure then. I'd come west to teach because Philadelphia had felt like a cage. My mother's drawing room, my father's expectations. The narrow life they'd planned for me, marriage to some banker's son. Children. Endless tea parties discussing nothing that mattered. I'd wanted purpose. I'd wanted to make a difference. I thought I was bringing civilization to these frontier children. Turns out I was the one who needed educating. The children started arriving around 8. I knew each of them by name now. Could catalog their different circumstances the way I'd been trained to catalog their academic progress. There was Tommy, the blacksmith's son, always with soot under his fingernails. Sarah and Ruth, the twins whose father ran the general store. Little Michael, only 5, who cried every morning when his mother left. And Emma. Emma was 7 years old, thin as a willow switch, with eyes that looked ancient in her small face. She never raised her hand, but those eyes followed every word I wrote on the slate. Hungry in a different way than her stomach, though I'd noticed that hunger too. The way you notice sky is blue, fact without action. She was always quiet, always watching, always alone during recess while other children played. I'd told myself she was shy, that she'd come out of her shell eventually. I'd told myself a lot of things that let me sleep at night. The gift exchange began mid-morning. I'd brought peppermints for each child, nothing expensive, just a small token. They came forward one by one with their offerings. Tommy had carved me a small wooden star. Sarah and Ruth presented a drawing they'd made together, remarkably detailed for their age. Michael gave me a rock he'd painted, and I praised it like it was precious. I accepted each gift with genuine warmth, arranging them on my desk, feeling proud of the community we'd built in this little schoolhouse. Proud of my role in their lives. The young Eastern teacher bringing knowledge to the frontier. God, I'd been blind. Emma approached last, clutching something wrapped in cloth. She moved like she was trying not to take up space. The way I'd seen her move every day and never quite registered what that meant. "Merry Christmas, Miss Clara," she whispered. Her voice was so soft, I had to lean down to hear her. Up close, I could see how carefully she'd washed her face that morning. Though her dress was the same one she wore every day, carefully mended but thin for winter, I smiled at her. This quiet child, finally connecting with me. Merry Christmas. Emma? She held out the cloth bundle. I took it, expecting perhaps another rock, maybe a pressed flower. The weight was wrong, though. Substantial, oddly shaped. I unwrapped the cloth carefully while Emma watched my face with an intensity that should have warned me. Inside was a potato, not cooked, not even washed properly. Just a raw potato with dirt still clinging to its skin. I froze, my smile locked in place. Behind me, I heard some of the other children giggle. That sound broke through my paralysis. "Emma," I said, trying to be kind, trying to understand. "This is very sweet, but you should keep this for your family." She looked at me with those ancient eyes. 7 years old and already carrying the weight of the world. "We don't got no more." 5 words. That's all it took. Something in my chest broke. Not metaphorical, not poetic. an actual physical sensation of my heart cracking open. I stood there holding that potato while the other children resumed their chattering. Someone asked if we were going to sing Christmas carols. Someone else wanted to know when we'd eat the cookies I'd brought. My mind was racing, trying to process what Emma had just said, trying to make it make sense. A potato, not cooked, not even washed properly. Why would she give me her family's food, unless we don't got no more? I'd been teaching these children for 3 months. 3 months of alphabet and arithmetic, of grammar lessons and spelling bees. 3 months. And I didn't know. Emma was still standing there, watching me with those patient, ancient eyes, waiting for something. Dismissal. Probably. She'd given her gift. She'd done what children do on Christmas. Now she wanted to sink back into invisibility. Thank you, Emma. I managed. This is very thoughtful. She nodded once and returned to her seat in the back row, the seat she always chose, the one farthest from the stove. I taught the rest of the morning on instinct, my mouth forming words while my mind spun in circles. I kept looking at Emma, really looking, maybe for the first time. Her dress wasn't just worn, it was too small, the hem shortened multiple times. Sleeves that ended too far above her wrists. Her shoes had newspaper stuffed in them to fill the gaps. I could see the edges of it sticking out. How had I not seen that before? And her face, so thin. Cheekbones sharp beneath skin that looked almost translucent in the winter light streaming through the windows. I'd noticed her thinness the way you notice sky is blue. Fact without action. We sang the Christmas carols. We ate the cookies I'd brought. I watched Emma take two carefully, like she was afraid someone would tell her she couldn't, and wrap them in the same cloth that had held the potato. For later. For home. For siblings I hadn't known she had. At day's end, the children filed out into the December afternoon. Most were chattering about their Christmas dinners, what their mothers were cooking, what gifts they hoped to find tomorrow morning. Emma left silently, clutching her cloth bundle, beginning the walk home. I stood at the schoolhouse window and watched her go, small figure against the snow, heading east toward the rough country beyond town. That mile she walked every day suddenly seemed very long. I looked down at the potato in my hand. It wasn't large. It wasn't special. It was evidence of something I could no longer pretend not to see. My mother had thrown away more food than this on any given Tuesday, had scraped plates full of uneaten meals into the trash while complaining about the cook's seasoning. I'd grown up in a world where waste was normal, where abundance was assumed, where hunger was something that happened to other people in other places. Not here. Not in my schoolhouse. Not to children I saw every day. I'd thought teaching was alphabet and grammar and careful penmanship. Emma had just taught me different. I didn't plan to follow her. Didn't wake up that morning thinking I'd spend Christmas evening walking through the cold to see how one of my students lived, but after school. I grabbed my warmest shawl and went. The town ended quickly once you headed east. Past the last houses, past the church. Into rough country where families scraped out existence on the margins. I'd never come this way before. No reason to. My boarding house was west, near the respectable part of town. My life existed in a comfortable radius that didn't include this. Emma was ahead of me, small figure moving steadily through the snow. She didn't look back, didn't know I was there. The landscape changed with each step. Town to outskirts to raw frontier. The path, you couldn't really call it a road wound between scrub brush and rocky outcrops. Snow had drifted in places, making the walking difficult. Each step took me further from the world I understood. I'd been walking maybe 20 minutes when Emma turned off even this poor excuse for a path. She headed up a small rise, and I stopped, suddenly afraid to see what lay beyond. But I'd come this far. I climbed the rise and looked down. It wasn't a cabin. It wasn't even a proper shanty. It was a lean-to, boards and canvas propped against the hillside, held together with hope and determination. Smoke should have been rising from a chimney, but there was no chimney, just that temporary shelter against the December wind. Emma reached the entrance, just a gap with a piece of canvas pulled across, and slipped inside. I saw movement within, heard children's voices, high and thin. I stood there in the gathering dusk, frozen by more than cold. This was where Emma lived, where she walked to every day after school, where she'd wake up tomorrow on Christmas morning. This was what "we don't got no more" actually meant. I couldn't knock, couldn't intrude on whatever was happening inside that inadequate shelter, couldn't face Emma's mother, couldn't bear to see the younger siblings, couldn't make myself walk down that slope and confront the full reality of what I was witnessing. So I did what cowards do. I turned around and walked back to town. The mile back felt longer than the mile there. Dark came on fast, and the temperature dropped. I pulled my shawl tighter, my good wool shawl, probably worth more than everything Emma's family owned, and hurried toward the lights of town. Safe lights, warm lights. Lights that meant fireplaces and hot dinners and beds with blankets enough to keep out the cold. I reached my boarding house after full dark. Mrs. Hendricks had saved me a plate roast chicken, potatoes, bread with butter. I looked at it and thought of Emma dividing one potato among how many siblings. "Are you all right?" "Dear," Mrs. Hendricks asked, "you look pale." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired from the school party." In my room, I set the potato on my nightstand. Couldn't eat it. Couldn't throw it away. Evidence of something I could no longer pretend not to see. I'd spent 3 months teaching children their letters while some of them starved. What was I supposed to do? The question sat with me through the night. Through my comfortable bed with its layers of quilts. Through the breakfast Mrs. Hendricks brought me in the morning. Through the Christmas service at church, where the sermon was about charity and caring for the least among us. The question wouldn't leave me alone. What was I supposed to do? Monday morning, I arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early. Couldn't sleep anyway. The potato sat on my desk like an accusation. I'd spent Sunday thinking, not praying, though I'd sat in church, not celebrating, though it was Christmas. Just thinking about one question that had too many answers and not enough. What was I supposed to do? I started by really watching this time. The children arrived in their usual pattern. Tommy came early because his father started work at dawn. The twins came together, chattering. Michael came crying as always, though his mother had clearly fed him a good breakfast. And Emma came last, moving quiet as a shadow to her seat in the back. But now I was watching for others like her. I saw them. God help me. I saw them everywhere once I started looking. Peter, who was 9, who wore the same shirt every day and never brought lunch. I'd thought he wasn't hungry at midday. Thought he was just particular about his eating habits. Little Annie, 6 years old, who always looked tired. I'd thought she stayed up late. Thought her parents didn't enforce bedtime. James and John, brothers, who shared one lunch between them and pretended it was a game. I thought it was sweet. Brotherly love. 7 children. 7 out of 18 looked like Emma hollow-cheeked, old-eyed, quiet in that particular way that means survival, not shyness. I'd been teaching them alphabet and grammar while they sat at their desks trying to concentrate through the distraction of empty stomachs. The morning crept by. I taught mathematics, but my mind was counting different numbers. 7 children. How many families? How many siblings at home? How much need existed within walking distance of my comfortable boarding house at midday? I did something I'd never done before. I'd brought extra biscuits that morning, told Mrs. Hendricks I wanted them for the children as a Christmas treat. I set them on my desk and then, deliberately, turned away to write something on the slate. When I turned back, the biscuits were gone. The hungry children had taken them so quickly, so silently. You'd have thought they'd never existed. Emma had taken 2. I watched her wrap one carefully in her cloth, the same cloth that had held the potato to take home. The other she ate in tiny bites, making it last, savoring every crumb. She was 7 years old and already dividing nothing into smaller pieces. After school, I walked into town with a new purpose. The general store first. Mr. Patterson looked up when I entered. "Miss Clara, what can I do for you?" "I wanted to ask about Emma," I said carefully. "Emma, who's in my class. The quiet girl." His face shifted something between pity and discomfort. The Murray girl. Sad case. That father died in a mining accident 2 years back. Mother does washing when she can get it, but with 4 little ones, he trailed off, shaking his head. 4 children, Emma and 3 others, all living in that lean-to. "What about the church?" I asked. "Don't they help? Church does what it can," Mr. Patterson said. "But there's a lot of need out here. Miss Clara, more than charity can cover. People do their best. Their best." I thought of that lean-to. Thought of the potato. Thought of Emma's ancient eyes. I bought flour and salt pork with my own money. Not much, I didn't have much, but something. Mr. Patterson wrapped it carefully and didn't ask questions when I told him to set it aside for the Murray family. Walking back to my boarding house, I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. Which houses had smoke rising from chimneys? Which didn't? Which children played outside in warm coats? Which didn't have coats at all? Biscuits, I thought bitterly. I was bringing biscuits to children who needed everything. That night, I sat at my small desk and tried to make sense of the problem. Tried to find an equation that would solve for hunger the way mathematics solved for X. But people aren't numbers. Need isn't a variable you can isolate and eliminate. The question had changed, though. It wasn't, what was I supposed to do anymore? It was, what could I actually do? The school board meeting notice came on Wednesday. Routine quarterly report. Nothing unusual. I'd forgotten it was scheduled until the reminder arrived. I almost didn't go. What was the point? I'd tell them the children were learning their letters, mastering basic arithmetic, improving their penmanship. Everyone would nod. Everyone would be satisfied. But I kept thinking about Emma's potato, about those 7 hungry children sitting in my classroom every day. I decided to speak. The meeting was Thursday evening at the church. I arrived early, rehearsing words I'd never imagined needing. How did you tell respected community members that children were starving under their watch? How did you say that without sounding hysterical, emotional? Like a woman who didn't understand how things worked. 3 board members attended. Reverend Carson, who chaired Mr. Patterson from the general store, and Samuel Brennan, who owned the lumber mill. I gave my standard report. Reading levels improving. Attendance steady. No discipline problems worth noting. Then I took a breath and stepped off the edge. "There's something else," I said. "Something I need to bring to your attention." Reverend Carson smiled indulgently. "Of course. Miss Clara, several of my students are coming to school hungry. Not just missing breakfast, genuinely hungry. Malnourished." The words felt too clinical, too distant from the reality of Emma's hollow cheeks. "I think we need to consider providing meals." The silence that followed was heavy. Mr. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. Reverend Carson's smile faded. But Samuel Brennan leaned forward, eyes sharp with sudden attention. "How many students?" he asked. "At least 7 that I've identified. Probably more I haven't noticed yet." "The families should manage better," Reverend Carson said firmly. "We can't encourage dependency. They're children." I interrupted. Probably shouldn't have. But the word dependency had hit something raw. They're children who are trying to learn while their stomachs are empty. "Miss Clara," Reverend Carson's voice held warning. "You're new to the frontier. You don't understand. I understand that one of my students gave me her family's last potato for Christmas," I said. My voice was shaking, but I kept going. "I understand that 7-year-olds shouldn't have to choose between eating and sharing." The meeting ended awkwardly after that. Mr. Patterson excused himself quickly. Reverend Carson reminded me, coolly, that my job was teaching, not social reform. But Samuel Brennan caught up with me outside. "Miss Clara, would you walk with me a moment?" I almost said no. I was shaking from the confrontation, afraid I'd just ended my teaching career with my inability to stay quiet. But something in his face stopped me. We walked in silence for a bit. Then he spoke. "I had a daughter once. About Emma's age." His voice was carefully controlled. "Winter of '79. She took sick. Might have survived if she'd been stronger. If we'd had better food. Warmer house?" He stopped walking. Looked at me. "She didn't survive." His eyes held the same thing mine did. Grief for a child. Rage at injustice. "You're right to be concerned. Miss Clara," he said. "Question is what we do about it." We talked for an hour, made plans, drafted a proposal. Samuel knew the politics of the town in ways I didn't. Knew who to approach, how to phrase things, what arguments would work. By the time we parted, I had an ally. I had hope. Walking home, I noticed lamplight in windows differently. Behind every lit window, someone was warm and fed. Behind dark windows, maybe not, but maybe we could change that. The proposal took 2 weeks to prepare. Samuel and I worked carefully, anticipating objections, building a case that even the most resistant community members couldn't easily dismiss. We proposed a school lunch program, donations from merchants, church ladies providing cooking space, volunteers on rotation, nothing that would strain the town budget, nothing that could be labeled handouts or charity that destroyed dignity. We presented it first to the church board on a Sunday afternoon, then to the town council on Tuesday evening. Both meetings went badly. Reverend Carson spoke first at the church board meeting. "This sets a dangerous precedent. If we feed children, we remove responsibility from parents. We make people dependent on help instead of teaching them self-reliance." I'd prepared for this argument. I'd rehearsed my response. "We're teaching them that community cares," I said, "that they matter, that hunger isn't punishment for their parents' poverty." One of the wealthy women, Mrs. Dalton, whose husband owned half the town, shook her head. "You're young. Miss Clara, you don't understand these families. They need to learn to manage better." Manage. As if poverty were a failure of household budgeting. As if you could balance a ledger that started with nothing. The town council was worse. Mayor Winters listened to our proposal with increasing irritation. "Where does it end?" he demanded. "We feed the children. Then they need clothes. Then housing. The town budget can't support. The town budget isn't being asked to support anything." Samuel interrupted. "This is entirely donation-based. Still sets a precedent." Another council member argued. "Makes us responsible for every family's problems." I felt rage building. Clean. Pure rage at the euphemisms. At grown men talking about precedent and responsibility while children went to bed hungry. "Dignity," I said, voice harder than I'd intended. Reverend Carson said, "Letting families maintain dignity. You know what's not dignified. Watching your children starve. There's no dignity in that. The room went silent. I'd gone too far. Spoken too forcefully. Let my anger show. Miss Clara, Mayor Winters said coldly, perhaps you should remember that you're here as a courtesy. You're a teacher, not a policymaker. The proposals were tabled indefinitely. Samuel and I walked out into the cold evening. I was shaking again, but this time with fury instead of fear. They're wrong, I said. They're wrong, and they know it. They're scared. Samuel replied, change is frightening, especially when it asks you to see things you've been pretending not to notice. We stood outside the church, both of us frustrated, both of us wondering what came next. Then I saw her, Emma's mother, standing in the shadows by the church wall. She'd been at the meeting. I hadn't noticed her in the back row. Now she stepped forward, and in the lamplight, I could see her face, thin like Emma's, worn beyond her years. Hands that were red and raw from washing other people's laundry in December. Cold? She didn't speak, just came forward and gripped my hand briefly. Her calluses scraped my palm. I held on anyway. Thank you, she whispered. Then she was gone, melting back into the darkness. I stood there with my hand still tingling from her grip. The town leaders had said no, but Emma's mother had said, thank you. I didn't know which mattered more, but I knew which felt more true. The letter arrived on Saturday morning. Superintendent's office, meeting Monday at 10 o'clock. I'd known it was coming. You don't challenge town leaders and church boards without consequences. Still, seeing it in writing made my hands shake. Saturday and Sunday crawled by. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept imagining the confrontation. Superintendent, a man I'd met exactly once, at my hiring interview, telling me I'd overstepped, that I'd caused division, that frontier teaching positions were hard to fill but not impossible to replace. I imagined losing my job, losing my room at Mrs. Hendricks's boarding house, having to return to Philadelphia in failure, my father's disappointed silence, my mother's, I told you so, the narrow life I'd escaped, rushing back to claim me. Monday morning. I dressed carefully, tried to look professional, competent, like a woman who understood her place. The superintendent's office was above the bank. I climbed the stairs at exactly 10 o'clock, each step feeling like walking to my own execution. Sit down. Miss Clara. He didn't look angry. That was somehow worse. He looked disappointed, patient, like a father correcting a wayward child. I've heard some concerning reports about your behavior, he began. Upsetting community members, exceeding your role, making accusations. I didn't make accusations, I said quietly. I stated facts. Children in my classroom are hungry. That may be, but your job is to teach reading and arithmetic. Leave social reform to those qualified for it. Those qualified, meaning men. Meaning people who weren't emotional young women with impractical ideas. The children can't learn if they're starving. I said, Miss Clara. His voice was firm now. Final. I'm going to be very clear. Teach your students their letters. Teach them numbers. Do your job. Stop making trouble. Because teaching positions may be hard to fill, but I assure you, they're not impossible to replace. The threat couldn't have been clearer. I stood, walked out, made it to the street before my legs started shaking. I went home, sat in my small room, pulled out my trunk and stared at it. I could pack, could write my resignation, could leave with some dignity before being forced out. It would be easier. Keep quiet. Look away from hungry faces. Pretend I didn't know what I knew. The resignation letter wrote itself in my head. I could see the words, could imagine handing it over. Could picture myself on the train heading east, leaving this all behind. I sat there as afternoon faded to evening. Sat in the dark, holding an imaginary letter. Then I thought about Emma. Thought about her wrapping half a biscuit to take home. Thought about those ancient eyes. Thought about her giving me that potato, her family's last food, because it was Christmas, and you give gifts. On Christmas, what would Emma think if I gave up now? If I left, because it got hard, she'd survived harder. She survived every day. I lit the lamp, looked at my reflection in the dark window. Saw myself holding that imaginary resignation letter. Saw what I'd become if I handed it over. Maybe teaching wasn't just alphabet and arithmetic. Maybe it was this, standing between children and a world that didn't see them. Speaking when silence would be easier. Staying when leaving would be safer. I didn't write the resignation letter. I didn't know what I'd do, but I knew what I wouldn't do anymore. I wouldn't be quiet. Sunday morning, I dressed for church with my decision made, but my hands shaking. I'd spent the week teaching, watching Emma and the other hungry children, thinking about courage and what it actually meant. Courage wasn't not being afraid. Courage was being terrified and doing it anyway. I was terrified. The service started normally. Hymns, prayers. Then Reverend Carson's sermon, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing at the bitter irony. His text was Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats. I was hungry, and you fed me. He spoke eloquently about caring for the least of these, about Christian duty, about compassion, never once mentioning the lunch program proposal he'd helped defeat. The sermon ended. Announcements began. Upcoming church social, ladies' auxiliary meeting, Christmas pageant planning for next year. I stood up, didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just stood while Reverend Carson was mid-sentence about the pageant. The church went silent. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said. My voice shook, but it carried. "But I need to speak." Reverend Carson's face went red. "Miss Clara, this will only take a moment." I didn't sit down. Couldn't sit down. If I sat, I'd never stand again. I looked around the congregation, saw the wealthy families in front, saw the poor families in back, saw Emma with her siblings in the last pew. On Christmas morning, I began. One of my students gave me a gift. She walked up to my desk and handed me a potato, just a raw potato with dirt still on it. The other children laughed. I could feel everyone's attention now. The wealthy ones, uncomfortable. The poor ones leaning forward. I tried to give it back, told her to keep it for her family. She looked at me and said, "We don't got no more." She'd given me her family's last food. My voice cracked. I kept going. I followed her home that day, found out she lives in a lean-to with 3 siblings. No heat. No food. Nothing. Mrs. Dalton shifted in her seat. Her husband stared at the floor. I've identified 7 children in my classroom who come to school hungry. 7. And those are just the ones I've noticed. There are probably more. Reverend Carson tried to interrupt. "Miss Clara, this isn't appropriate. Jesus said I was hungry and you fed me," I said, looking directly at him. "That was your sermon. Those were your words. So I'm asking you, asking all of you, what would Jesus actually do? Not what would be convenient. Not what would avoid setting precedents. What would Jesus do?" Silence. Then Samuel Brennan stood. "She's right. We know she's right." A moment later, Emma's mother stood. She didn't speak, just stood. Then another mother. Then another. Then, surprisingly, Mrs. Patterson from the general store. Then her husband, One by one, people stood, not everyone. Mayor Winters stayed seated. Reverend Carson looked furious. But enough people. More than enough. After the service, everyone gathered outside, not leaving, talking, planning. Mrs. Patterson approached me first. I can cook on Tuesdays. I have extra beans from harvest. Another woman offered, Mr. Patterson, I'll donate flour weekly. Samuel organized it, made lists, assigned duties. Within an hour, we had a functioning plan. No town budget, no official approval, just people choosing to help. I'd been afraid of losing my position. I'd forgotten to be afraid of losing myself. Walking home, several women surrounded me. Not to condemn, to organize, to help. I'd thought I'd be alone. I'd been wrong. And in the back of the dispersing crowd, I saw Emma watching. She nodded once, slightly. That 7-year-old's approval meant more than the superintendent's ever would. 3 months later, spring was trying to arrive, snow melting in patches. First green showing in sheltered spots. Windows open in the schoolhouse to let in fresh air. I arrived early as always, but now I wasn't alone. Mrs. Patterson and 2 other women were already there, cooking in the church kitchen next door. The smell of vegetable soup drifted through the morning. The lunch program had started the week after my church speech. Quiet at first. Just a few volunteers. Just a simple meal. But it had grown. The church ladies rotated cooking duties. Mr. Patterson donated staples weekly. Other merchants contributed what they could. No town budget required. No official approval needed. Just people choosing to see. Choosing to help. The children arrived in their usual pattern. But everything was different now. Emma came in and smiled, actually smiled, when she smelled the soup. Peter didn't hide in the back anymore. Little Annie looked less tired. They were still poor. Poverty doesn't vanish because of soup. Emma's family had moved to better housing. Samuel had found them a real cabin, but it would be months, maybe years, before they weren't struggling. But they were fed. Every day. Regular meals. Enough food. It was a start. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. At midday, we served lunch, hot soup, bread with butter. Enough for everyone with seconds available. I watched Emma eat slowly, savoring each bite. She still saved some bread to take home. Old habits die hard. Poverty leaves marks that abundance can't erase immediately. But she ate. She and her siblings ate. After lunch, during reading time, Emma volunteered to read aloud. First time all year. Her voice was soft but clear, reading about a girl who went on an adventure. She'd always been smart. Now she had strength to show it. That afternoon, after the students left, I sat at my desk doing paperwork. The potato, the original one, dried hard as stone, now sat on the shelf behind me. I'd kept it. Reminder of what one child's dignity had taught one ignorant teacher. Samuel stopped by as I was finishing. We'd become friends over these months, partners in the quiet revolution we'd started. Council's asking about expanding the program. He said, maybe adult meals too. Work program. I smiled. That would be good. You started something. Clara, Emma started it. I corrected. I just finally learned to see. He left. I gathered my things, preparing to head home. Tomorrow I'd teach grammar. Next week, geography, the regular work of a schoolhouse. But I'd also keep watching, keep speaking, keep standing. People said I'd helped Emma. They called me brave, called me an advocate. Truth was simpler and harder. Emma had given me a potato on Christmas morning. In return, I'd learned to see not a fair trade. She deserved better. but it was the beginning of better. Sometimes that's what love looks like. Imperfect people doing. Imperfect good, because one child had courage to give her only food away. I locked the schoolhouse door and headed home through the spring evening. The week had been long. Next week would be longer. There was always more need than help, more problems than solutions. But there were also 7 children who ate lunch today. 7 children who smiled. 7 children who were learning that community meant something. I kept teaching, kept advocating, kept learning from children who'd been teaching me all along. The West had one more civilized person in it. Emma had seen to that.